Welcome to Travel Around Susie. Thank you for joining. Lots of people are showing up here. This is a first time event here at Coopersville Cemetery, and we will go to 7 different spots. As for example, there's one spot right over here where they're just a group of people and we will listen to each speaker. After that, we will walk to the next spot, and I hope that you guys all enjoy this. I'm keeping my eye on the group because they're going to send another group out to a different site. Then we will get that spot and then we'll just make our rounds and we will have a guide. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you for being on this channel and watching my videos.
So we're going to start on this today. Just get as close as you can over in this area. This is Mrs. Suchin's area. She's going to be telling you her story.
Help! Help me! He's killing my son! I screamed as loud as I could as I left my house. Willie was lying helpless in the home. He had been beaten to death by my husband, my enraged maniac husband, Willie's own father. If I could just get out of the house and get across the street to our neighbors. The McClellans lived across the street from us and they were our closest neighbors. I would be safe, or so I thought. How had I gotten to this point? What had happened? My name is Polly Mary Scutcheon. Everyone calls me Polly, and I had immigrated from England to the United States, and I had met my husband, Henry. He was also English. I thought the United States was the land of opportunity, and everything would be wonderful here. Henry and I had met. We married in 1889. I had a 2-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, and I thought that Henry would make a good husband and provide a good home for us. We rented 40 acres on 88th and Arthur, and we had 3 sons. Oh, maybe those 3 sons were part of the problem. Charlie was born the year after we married in 1890. 2 years later, little Willie came along. Little Willie was a cripple from birth. He couldn't dress himself. He couldn't clothe himself or feed himself. As he grew older, the neighbors collected a fund and they bought a wheelchair for him. Then we had George in 1897. All of my boys had health problems. You now would probably call them genetic issues, but they struggled with heart issues. We couldn't afford doctors. We took care of them the best that we could in our home. But we had a rough year in 1904. Both of my boys died. Can you imagine, as a parent, losing 2 of your sons in just a few short months? Charlie was 13 when he died in February, and George died in April of that same year. He was 6. That probably added to the stress in our home. Well, we had additional stress in our home as well. We had taken in George Anning. It depends on who you listen to. George was either my father, stepfather, foster father, or my uncle. And George was a deserter from the British Navy. He had changed his name to George Green when he got here so that the Navy wouldn't find him. He was a bridge tender over the Grand River in Spoonville. And then later he conducted a saloon in Newpowa. People thought he was rich, and he probably was at one point, but then his wife died, and George took to drinking. By the time we took him into our home, he was an object of poverty. He was decrepit, on crutches, and nearly 80, just an additional mouth for us to have to feed. The neighbors noticed there was something different about Henry. He had never really socialized very much anyway. He kept to himself and not too many people knew him. However, there is a photo of me hanging in the Coopersville Museum of the barn rising of Henry Veneman's barn. And I am there with my young son, little Willie. You see, I did socialize, but the neighbors, they stayed clear of Henry. My own daughter, May, who at this point was married now and living on her own, encouraged me to leave him. She feared for our lives. She knew there was something wrong. Well, it was July 21, 1907 at 5 a.m. in the morning. Henry was out of his mind. He was crazed. He was beating little Willie with his axe. I tried to stop him, but I couldn't do anything. He was crazy. So I thought if I could just get out of the house, I would be okay and I could get help. The McClellans, our neighbors, heard all of the commotion and woke up, and they looked out their window and watched in horror as the scene unfolded in front of them. I made it to the middle of the road. Henry saw I was leaving, and he came after me, and he struck me in the back right there on the road, and I fell to the ground, lifeless. Henry just looked at me for a moment and turned around and walked back into the house. He went to finish off poor George. When they found George's body, crutches were 10 feet from the house, and his beaten body lay 70 feet beyond that. Well, Mrs. McClellan, she saw me laying in the road, and she came and she dragged me up to her front porch. And I revived a little bit, was able to walk into the front room, and she locked the door behind us. And then she took her children and she escaped with her children out the back door, but I was just too weak. Henry saw that I was gone, and he grabbed his axe and he brought the axe and he blew it through the window with one crack. The glass shattered, and Henry came through the front window, and he took his axe and he repeatedly beat me until I was dead. They said my head was nearly severed from my body. Well, Henry went back home then, and Mr. McClellan had gone to the neighbors, Lester Timmerman, and gotten him for backup support. And they came out, and Henry reappeared, and they told Henry, "You back off, you stay away." Henry said, "I just killed my family and I will kill you too." They repeatedly said stop, and he kept coming, and they took that shotgun and they shot him full on in the chest with #1 bird shot. He fell to the road and he writhed in pain for 15 minutes. Until he finally died. It was found out later he intended for himself to die. He had taken a knife and cut himself 2 times in one arm and 1 time in the other arm. And he had drank a healthy dose of Paris green, which is a deadly poison. And that's likely what caused him to writhe and have spasms of pain. Mr. McClellan and Mr. Timmerman were found innocent of shooting him. His death was caused from the arsenic he had drank. They took our bodies to the local mortuary and laid us out there. Our deaths made national news. Can you imagine the headlines all across the country? And hundreds of people came to view our bodies, likely to the horrible story of our deaths. Now, all 5 of my family, my 2 sons who died in 1904, little Willie, and myself, and my poor mad husband, are all buried here in these unmarked graves. But thank you to you for coming today. My story will live on. Thank you for sharing my memories.
Thank you.
Good. So the graves are unmarked right in this area, right here.
All 5 of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Well, this is Mr. John Lau.
Welcome, guys. Hi, my name is Randy Lau, and today I will tell you about my grandfather, John A. Lau. My grandfather died in 1947, 6 years before I was born. So everything I know came from either family memories or acquaintances or old observers. The old observers, I don't know if most of you ever seen one, but in the old observers, every day since 1880, they told stories about the people that grew up in Coopersville. So I grew up with my grandpa, reading his stories out of the old observers and collected all the data and have it recorded and stuff like that. So that's the only thing I know about my grandpa, because my dad was 16 years old when he died. Grandpa was born in 1891 to Harm Jr. and Grace Lau on their farm at the southeast corner of 68th Ave and Cleveland Street, just outside the village limit. He was raised on the farm, spent a few years in Grand Rapids, and then before returning to open the grocery store with his brother-in-law, Harry Sickerman. He was the local grocer on Main Street in Coopersville from 1913 until his death in 1947. Of course, in those days, there was no building addresses, but it was located on the north side of the street, about halfway down, and still remains there today, known to most as AKA Hair Salon at 305 Main Street. Fortunately, a friend of mine bought all those buildings, 4 of them, and one of them happened to be Grandpa's, and he asked me one day if we could turn the store back into the original facade. And since then, 4 more stores have been turned into the original facades in 1906 and on. So I was able to work in Grandpa's store, putting it back together. The new business was called Sickerman and Lau. In 1916, Harry decided to go out of the grocery business, but John A. continued on for another 30 years. John A. and his first wife, Anna, had 3 children. Anna died at a very young age, but Bud, their youngest, was just 6 months old. John remarried Minnie Myers, and together they had another 3 children, the youngest, Cal, being my father. Coopersville was a booming village at that time. There were several grocery stores on Main Street, but John A.'s motto was aims to please. It was a form of a signature or promise and was written on every grocery receipt. Unlike today, grocers stood behind the counter in long white aprons like me, white shirts and tie. Customers would bring in their list for 1 pound of flour, 2 pounds of sugar, eggs. The grocer would scoop out the 1 pound of flour, eggs, and such and bring them back to the counter where the customer would pay. We'd like that, wouldn't we?
Yes.
Just go in and tell them what you want and wait. Grandpa told the story that 1 week before the village bank closed, he purchased the house at 375 Cleveland Street. If he had not withdrawn that $5,000, within 1 week, that money would have been lost. The year was 1931. The crash, he had inside trader information. The year was 1931, the crash was 1929, and the depression ran until 1939, when banks closing periodically with no notice throughout those early years. Loss was 2 years old when John and Minnie moved their family of 5 kids to this beautiful home on Cleveland Street, located at the end of Center. During the Depression, 1929 to 1939, had to hold balances for customers so they could charge their groceries. Times were hard during the Depression years, and many times he had to carry them for a while. Bartering was also a big deal back then, and exchanges were made for eggs and produce. To enhance the customers with giveaways were you could come in and buy so many dollars of groceries and you could get a free cup and saucer in hopes of eventually you would like the collection. This happens to be an original. At the time, my aunt has it in her collection. So this was what he was giving away back at that time if we bought so many groceries. My dad, Cal, and his oldest sister, Lois, both recall delivering groceries long before they had license to drive. Bud, the oldest son, worked in the store alongside his dad for many years. When John A. had taken ill, Bud ran the store the last year. He continued managing the store after his dad died in hopes of taking over, but Minnie sold the store a year later. According to his obituary, my grandpa was well respected and liked among his fellow businessmen and customers. He had taken an active interest in the affairs of the community, had been an officer in the Businessmen's Association, and was one of the most ardent boosters for the community athletic program. He was a big Detroit fan as well, taking trips to Detroit along with the family and friends. He passed away in 1947 at the age of 56 after 35 years as a grocer who aims to please. Eventually, he had 23 grandchildren, and some still reside in the Coopersville area. Part of the Lau farm is on the corner of 68th and Cleveland, still belongs to a Lau descendant. Any questions?
So the house at the end of Center Street?
Yes.
That's Mike's old house?
Yes,
Yeah.
Mike Lau.
Mike.
Yeah, so, yeah, no, it's moving on.
Daddy.
But that's where most of the last 3 children grew up. Evelyn and Bud and Virginia were all a lot older, so they were out of the house by the time the 3 other kids came around. So quite a few years between them.
The farm, is that Mike Lau's parent?
No, that's the other side of the Lau family. They're related, second, third cousin, but Tom Postumus
Okay,
Oh.
on the south
the
side.
south side, the barn went down 2 years ago. Yeah, so Tom's had that for a long time.
Okay.
He got that from his mother. So.
Yeah.
Okay, and he's a cousin? Cousin?
He would be a first cousin.
First cousin.
Yeah.
So it's still in the family.
Yeah, so it's still in the family, that one. Yeah.
Was your grandfather's headstone there?
Right here is John A. Then that's Minnie.
Oh,
Probably a lot of you remember her because she worked at the school serving lunches. And then Anna was the first one, and she died very early after Bud was born. And then Uncle Gordon, he lives on Cleveland Street. And then Aunt Audrey's in there. Well, I found out this morning that Aunt Audrey just died in 2022, and her ashes are spread in Newpowa.
Oh.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
We love going home.
Oh my God, yeah. Beartooth Path was one of them. Sharon just mentioned that to me because I says, well, is she buried next to Uncle Gordon? Nope, she spread throughout the. Yeah, so other than that.
Thank you.
Thank you very
good.
much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
He'll be talking about Jake Bushman, someone we all probably know from school.
None of us had a teacher.
In fact, that's a good way to start this. I'm guessing that most of you know Mr. Bushman probably from being a school teacher. Am I correct about that? Did anyone have him for a piano teacher at the point? Anybody know that he was taking farming family? Yeah, I didn't know that stuff. No, school. I was just school. I'm doing one of the lessons I used to want to do back in 1979. Get around to it. Okay, I'm gonna start off with more personal stuff before he did. I first met a mother actually this year.
Oh, yeah.
There's one there he is, school teacher. That's how I know it. There he is, of course. And what a lot of people know from his all the piano playing that he did. That's Mr. Bosco, by the way, standing over his shoulder. Okay. I first met Jake Bushman when I was in his English novel class for a sports street classics such as Silas Marner and The Kill of Mockingbird. I'll get around to. He had a passion for his subjects, even if he had to repeat the same stories day after day and year after year. Close your book, put away your notes, and you'll have a little quiz. That's a memory I've never forgotten. It was a great experience taking his speech theater class at a time when I was very hesitant to stand up in front of people. He gave us all confidence to perform, not just in the classroom, but in a packed auditorium. But to my dismay, the format was changed many times to include singing, and not the reason I took the class. I would nervously count down the days till it was time to rehearse, which I didn't want to do at all because then I had to sing twice, once in front of my classmates during the rehearsal and then the school. Many times I'd use a fake cough and a smile, and when it was my turn to do the number, and he'd say to him, "I'm unable to do that rehearse today." Not being a dummy, he would smirk back at me and say, "Okay, but you will participate in the performance when it's time." And I did. Rinse the Blood Off My Toga was one of the plays I was involved in. It was a 1950s Roman comedy, and Mr. Bushman asked me to play Calpurnia, the wife of Julius Caesar. Not my first choice, but I was eager to please, and so I agreed. Now, Calpurnia had a premonition her husband was about to be assassinated, and begged him not to go to the meeting at the Senate on March 15th, the Ides of March. Well, Caesar went anyway and was stabbed several times, the last by Brutus. Calpurnia would tell anyone who would listen of her premonition, and begging him not to go by crying over and over, "Julie, don't go!" That was my only line. I was proud to say I never needed a prompter. My senior year, I won a major role in the Old West production of Deadwood Dick, where he gave a gold and played the role of the villain, Black Man Redford. As always, Mr. Bushman was very encouraging and supportive. I recall he came to a baseball game I participated in. I could still see his place standing next to the bleachers. I felt at that time became the sole purpose of seeing me play, and it was a good feeling. My last memory of this quiet man was at the end of my senior year when he asked me if I would join him for dinner. While my classmates started playing a great mask. He said it was tradition to include his first grade as male student. I felt honored to be included in such an exclusive group. I graduated high school in 1979. Well, as the next 10 or so years went by, I didn't make the effort to keep in touch, and I deeply regret it. I retired from teaching at the end of the 1988 school year. If I could go back in time and do things differently, I would have made more of an effort to know him and ask him more about his life. It's only after doing research for the cemetery tour that I realized my favorite teacher had a life outside of teaching. I would have asked questions to learn more about him. The following is the results of this research. The Bushman family had been farmers since before the beginning of the 20th century. John Bushman had property west of the village limits on Arthur Street. Eventually, so did his son, Jacob Bushman Sr., who married Minnie Veneman in 1910. Jacob Sr. and Minnie raised 10 children of their own, which included 5 girls, Marion, Irene, Ruth, Frances, and Ruby, and 5 boys, Harold, James, Earl, John, and Jacob Jr. Jr. was born October 8, 1927. Church was very important to the Bushman family, and each dedicated their lives to the teaching of the Reformed Church. Jake learned to play the piano and played often in public venues such as weddings and church services. In fact, when doing research, I came across as many as 50 of these performances. Unlike his father, who received his education at the Hanchin School, which is a one-room building in the country near his home, Jake attended high school at Coopersville. It was in the 1936 building, now known as the Community Services Building. During those years, he was a busy student and participated in the Glee Club, was the stage manager for the high school play, surprise, right? Was on the Zenith yearbook staff as its advertisement manager. Was a member of the Bible study program. And was a member of the commercial club whose purpose was to teach manners, dress, business, and everyday living. Lastly, he was part of the school newspaper, the Bronco, which put out 6 issues during the school year. After graduating in 1946, he enrolled at Hope College and majored in English. During the time spent there, he was president of the Glee Club, secretary of the Sociology Club, was a member of the Knickerbocker fraternity. Graduated on June 14, 1950, with a Bachelor of Arts degree, was hired to teach at Whitehall High School beginning in the fall. But you guys didn't know that one, did you? Well, this is why you didn't know it. However, he was inducted into the Army in Detroit, September 7, 1950. He was sent to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where he became the chaplain's assistant at the Calvary Road Chapel. On one occasion, his parents were present when he played the Hammond organ at the Sunday services and when he played at a song service at the Stockades. After his parents returned home to receive word that Jake had been promoted to private first class. The following year, 1952, he had reached the rank of corporal and sent to Munster, Germany. He took a train to Nordhorn and visited the Bushman homestead, which included visiting the old church where his grandfather, John Bushman, had been baptized many years before. The church had been built in the year 1400 and the organ installed in 1780. Jake was allowed to play this organ, and he said it sounded really good and had a really wonderful tone. He was able to have dinner at a family gathering at 45 before heading back to his barracks in Munster. Corporal Jacob Bushman Jr. completed his 15 months of overseas service and received his honorable discharge in August of 1952. He was then hired to teach English and speech dramatic courses at his old high school in Coopersville. He began decades of directing high school plays, and it started with a performance of The Campbells Are Coming. During his tenure, he taught language arts, American history, American literature, speech debate, and speech theater. On December 31st, 1953, soft-spoken Jake became engaged to the woman who would spend the rest of his life with, Florence Pokey Schmidt, who was employed at the Grand Rapids Letter Service. They were married at the Reformed Church on August 24th, 1954. His brother Earl sang at the wedding, and another brother, John, was his best man. Jake and Pokey went on to live at 88 Henry Street in the 11th subdivision. Jake continued his love of tickling the ivories, performed often throughout his life. In fact, on at least one occasion, Jake played the organ while Jack Bosco sang on radio station WMUS, a half-hour Sunday program. During these years, he was part of the faculty male quartet. He sang bass along with their band director, Jarvis Wiggers. He's named familiar, right? And he included the tenor singing of Jack Bosco and Angelo Vasello, who had such talent in high school. 4 boys were born to the Bushmans by 1960 and were named Philip, Paul, Curtis, and Kent. All were well-mannered, fine students who were involved in their high school football and track teams before graduating in the 1970s. If anyone knows Jake Bushman, you know he'll be very proud of his boys. Now, a former classmate of mine said something recently which rings true. Mr. Bushman was so happy to see the new auditorium at Coopersville High School. Spent the better part of 4 decades directing stage productions. It would have been wonderful had he been able to have such a facility during his tenure. Now, young people need role models in their lives. They need adults who treat them with respect, show interest in their lives. Jake Bushman is one of mine. He had an air about him which made it appear he had it all figured out. Jake Bushman passed away at the age of 64 in 1991 from brain cancer. However, his death has done little to fade the memories he has given me. He has been gone for over 30 years. But with this presentation, he lives on. I hope that he will live on with you as well. Thank you very much.
Here lies Wilbur Troutline. He was better known as Sam, and he was my dad. If you're wondering about the bell bonds, peace sign, it's because I'm going to be talking about Coopersville in the 1960s. So, if you will, think back to Coopersville 1963-ish, and the city fathers were hoping to add some family fun to Coopersville in the form of a community pool. My dad was asked, or maybe he volunteered, not sure, to do some research and present his findings to the Lions Club for starters. Well, our family was going to be out of town on the day of the meeting, so Dad recorded his presentation to be played at their meeting, and hopefully here it is.
Thank you, Les. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. As for being a novelist, I can't really make that claim in the true sense of the word, but only in the novel way I had to be here with you today, and also to be with my family on a trip to Detroit to see Cinerama and the Twilight doubleheader at Tiger Stadium. This means of communication no doubt has its good and bad points. For instance, it sure knocks in the head that old saying that can't be 2 places at the same time. On the other hand, it's a little hard for me to tell when you're getting bored and start sneaking out. However, I do want to check with Mr. Brown when I get back and see how many left early. As was announced at your meeting last week, a survey is being started on the community pool, and the extreme heat this summer has created a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for a pool. As I stated in the article in the paper, the little town of New Jersey did it, so why can't the biggest little town in western Michigan do it? I might add at this point, I'm not being paid by the Chamber of Commerce. I'm doing this and trying to get a pool started because of a very selfish motive. I want my kids, your kids, and all those in the community, as well as all of us post-teenagers, to have recreational facilities they and we can be proud of and want to enjoy, rather than having to chase to the big lake for a dip. Bear with me for a few moments while I draw you a mental picture of what I see in the summers to come. With sufficient backing by everyone, we can have our own pool, wading pool for tots, and play area all fenced in next summer. Then I see shuffleboard courts, horseshoe courts, skating areas, both ice and roller, possibly a miniature golf course, trampolines, well, just no end of inviting things to do for all ages. I have met with the council and asked for a parcel of land on which to locate the pool. Mr. B.J. Lemon gave the village about 6 acres back of the observer tower and about 28 acres over behind the old village dump. My preference is for the spot that is behind the observer tower, and my reasons are these. First of all, it is sand and very easy to dig, and the drainage would be excellent. Second, it is just about as near the center of town as possible, and is very close to the school. Being located close in would be an advantage for closer supervision than if it were located in an outlying spot. Of course, another advantage would be the short runs for both power and water. I mentioned close to the school, for we also have visions within a very short span to have the pool cover needed for year-round use. And what better activity than swimming classes being added to our school curriculum. I realize the late Dr. Lowndes set up a fund for a future pool at the school. This is very good, but the red tape of getting the whole district to approve of the school board spending money may hold up construction plans indefinitely, because many in the district would not approve of extra taxes for a pool. In the respect of a community pool, we would have a decided advantage, for only those who want a pool will sign up for a membership, and then we can proceed at once. I'm having postcards printed and mailed to approximately 1,300 families in the Coopersville area to get response on the pool and playground area. I had assurance from that other club that meets every other Wednesday night that they would pick up from half the tab for the cost. Your share in this would be greatly appreciated. We run about $50 per club, if it is your desire to help. Now you may ask what we know about installing a pool. Well, that's a good question. We have an equally good answer. Nothing. And really, one doesn't have to know anything about it. Whenever one family uses a pool publicly, it comes under state regulations, and the pool contractor must secure the necessary approval before he may install it. Now just a word on the financing. If we can get between 300 and 400 families to sign up, 400 would be better, we would have $40,000. We have plumbers, contractors, men with tractors and dozers in the area who could do a great amount of work for their share of the membership. Also, fence to be put up, cement forms, landscaping to do which is necessary, and which, if we do ourselves, will save us up to about 25% of the cost of the pool and facilities. Thus, the $40,000 pool will cost us about $30,000, leaving $10,000 plus the money taking in those guests paying by the hour to maintain the pool for the coming 5 years. After which time the 400 families would have a $40,000 pool for their own use for a possible fee of $20 to $30 a year or less, depending marginally on the paying guests. All this in addition to the prestige of knowing that we are a part of and deserving of the name Coopersville, the biggest little town in western Michigan. Now, Mr. Dale Brown, whom you have already met, will be glad to discuss any other suggestions you have, and will do his best to answer any questions you might have. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time.
The Coopersville Swim Club opened on Labor Day in 1965. Now they only had 95 members at the time, not nearly the number that they'd hoped for. So some of those dreams had to be put on hold. But when my dad died in December of 1966, he died knowing that he had helped lay a foundation for a legacy that still lives on at 465 Pine Street, nearly 60 years later. Just really proud of the part my dad played in feeding those dreams and helping that pool happen. Are there any pool members here, or past or present? Oh, good. Yeah, it's a great place.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming by. Hope you enjoy the rest of the walk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good leader. Man, he got it together.
Yeah, he liked doing that.
Where was that site by the observers, the other site that they didn't use.
Mill Street,
Okay.
back in the field behind
where
the
Public
building,
Works
the
is
old
now?
Dorn place.
Yep.
Yeah.
Back in there. Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice, thank you. My talk is on Mal Travis. How many knew Mal Travis? I figured you would. Mal was born May 27, 1913 and died May 1, 1980 at 67 years old. Mal lived his entire life in Coopersville at 250 Danforth. That's where we live. He lived there as a child and then at 322 West Randall as an adult. He graduated from Coopersville in the class of 1931. Shortly after graduating, he owned and operated a service station at 264 Main Street with Dr. Bill Ball. That building is now Coopersville Park here. Mal always kept busy trying new jobs, often 2 or more at a time. In 1937, he was working at the service station with Ray Hasty, delivering fuel to customers out in the country. The Coopersville Observer ran a story about Mal and Ray narrowly escaping serious injuries, possibly death, while delivering fuel to the C.C. Lilly Farm about 3.5 miles south of town. A severe wind, hail, and rainstorm had swept through the country. Mal and Ray Hastings had backed their delivery truck up to a shed to make the usual delivery and had just climbed back into the delivery truck when the building collapsed, burying the truck and both men in the debris. Fortunately, the truck had a steel-top hat. An issue of the Grand Rapids Herald newspaper also ran a story and a picture of the damage, but I don't have that picture, but I understand that they ran one too. But that wasn't the end of Mal Travis's story. That wasn't enough excitement. Mal joined the Coopersville Fire Department. In 1939, the fire station was at 276 Main Street, now Corte Body Shop. In 1940, while on the fire department, he was on a committee to purchase a brand new 1940 Ford open cab fire truck. That was a big story when Coopersville bought that new truck. John, my husband, Mal's nephew, has a story often told by firemen that served with Mal. Seems like Mal was known for driving that new truck as fast as he could get it to go. One day, Mal was driving that truck to the scene of a large fire, and of course, driving as fast as it would go. Heading north on Center Street and coming to the stop sign at Cleveland to turn left, the brakes gave out, and he ended up in Charlie Taylor's front yard. And that's just to the east of the intersection. Well, not to be slowed down responding to a fire call, he just backed that truck up and kept right on going without brakes, and probably 3 firemen on the back end hanging on for dear life, because you can see how it was all open in the back. That truck sometime in the 1970s was sold many times over and ended up in Petoskey, Michigan in terrible condition. John and I brought it back home to Coopersville when it was dark outside because it was so ugly and so bad shape, painted white with red flames on the side because some jeweler was going to use it in Petoskey for advertising. It was embarrassing. We waited till dark to haul it away. And then we had it restored and used it in a 4th of July parade. This is where the tanks were. We put benches in it and stuff. We used it for 4th of July and Labor Day parades and whatnot. In 1947 to 1951, Mal, along with a Jim Cook, operated a soda bar grill. It was called Century Soda Bar in the old Century Bowling Alley. Remember me saying Mal held many jobs at the same time? Service station, soda bar, fire department. So in 1950, tried something new. Mal moved his business to Randall Street with partner Harry Rush. That is now Busby's Repair, yet another new venture. Then in 1956, Mal was elected president of the village of Coopersville. Coopersville didn't become a city until 1963, so he couldn't be the mayor. He had to be the president of the village. While he was president of Coopersville, the village of Coopersville, the phones did not have direct dialing service for long distance. All long distance phone calls had to go through an operator. That all changed June 18, 1961. Mal got to be the first one to make a direct long distance dial phone call at 2:01 a.m. on a Sunday morning. He called his brother Paul Travis in Ripton, California. And that was a picture. Here was an ad that General Telephone was running
for people to sign up for that. Mal, as busy as he was, also found time to serve as a deputy for Ottawa County as a reserve on call when needed. The whole time he's doing all these other jobs, he still found time to do that. During his lifetime of new jobs and new opportunities, at one point he did try to work at General Motors in Grand Rapids, but he didn't like the repetitive work or being away from Coopersville for a whole day. But he did end up meeting Aunt Bill. She worked there in the office. They married August 23, 1901. Despite Mal being a staunch Republican and Aunt Billy being a staunch Democrat, that marriage lasted 45 years. They never had children, but all 18 nieces and nephews will tell you he was the best uncle you could ask for.
We always said
Oh, see,
I remember being little and my dad would go there for gas and always gave us candy.
well, that must be where John gets that from. He's always got candy to
Oh,
hand out.
yeah.
If you went to John now, I bet he's got a pocket full of lifesavers. It would be John's uncle.
Yeah.
John's mother and Bob Travis's father, they were part of that same family. And the house we're living in is where he was raised, at Grandma Travis. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. You're a very fine group of folks to stop by today. I don't get a lot of visitors here. Usually great grandchildren. But there are other people that stop, and they stop here because they notice something remarkable. As they're going by, they see this tree. It used to stand here tall and proud. It's since succumbed to age and weather. But you can see in this photograph, the tree had totally absorbed this stone. And even this stump today absorbs the stone and hides the identity of the soldier that's laying there. They marvel at the wonder of nature and how long it might have taken to do this. And then they ponder about what's the name of the soldier? What is the name that's hidden? And the name is hidden is my name, Joseph Brown, 3rd Michigan Infantry Corporal. Now, my story doesn't begin and end with the Civil War. My story begins in Coleraine, Massachusetts in 1825. And in 1850, I came here to Polkton. And I settled 2 miles east of here on some wild land, a large tract of it, which is now known as Tex Corner. 2 years on after that, I met Sarah Lawton, and I took her as my bride. Her kin are over there in the corner. First grave dug here was a Lawton. We set about to build our homestead and have a family. We had 4 children, a daughter and 3 fine sons. In the 50s. The 50s were good to us. And I took the honorable vocation of millwright. But then the war came in 61. And I joined the 3rd Michigan Infantry, and they made me a corporal. We met in Grand Rapids to depart, and there was a great celebration. The women sewed the greatest banners and flags for us to carry into battle. We left with much joy, but also tempered with the sorrow of parting. Had we known what we were in for, we would have had much greater trepidation. We were in there in the first Battle of Bull Run. 3rd Michigan was there, I was there, and we fought battle after battle for that first year. Until in the second Battle of Bull Run in Northern Virginia, I took a bullet through my left eye. And when I came to my senses, the battle had moved on, and there was no aid to be had. As the hours turned into evening the next day, I prepared to meet my fate. But on the 3rd day, I was found alive, and I was removed from that battlefield. I was taken to the hospitals in Washington, where they would remove the top 6 inches of my left thigh bone and feed me boiled eggs and pork to give me strength to recover. They saved my leg. I left there, the Fairfax Seminary Hospital, 2 days shy of my 1-year anniversary of being shot. I returned home. Wasn't the man I was when I left. Had a crutch. I could get about on that crutch. But then I became postmaster in 1867, and I would do that for 16 years. And then Sarah and I set about making our family larger. We had 5 children. 2 sadly perished as children. The other 3 grew up to old age. Youngest was Edith in 79. And then in 83, after 16 years of working as postmaster, I went into business with my son Fremont. And in 1883, we built this mill in Newpowa. We moved to Newpowa. And in 1891, we had this advertisement in the Potts and Conger Business Compendium of Ottawa County, doing all of the things that our grist mill could do. And we had a sawmill, lath and planing mill. The 80s and 90s were very good to us. And then in 1901, in late May, on a Saturday, while we were off to noon dinner, a fire broke out, destroyed the mill. The fury destroyed hundreds of bushels of grain, hundreds of railroad ties for that new electric interurban that they were building at the time, and stopped the trains from running. By the grace of God, the fire was carried out over open land, and the town of Newpowa was spared, as well as my home and the home of my children and their business. We had no insurance, could not rebuild. I resigned myself to be the patriarch of a very large family. Here I am with my grandchildren and children in 1905. Very large and fine group. In 1908, the observer would note that I was ill and feeble, and that my son from Ontario was summoned to be home. Then the next edition would have my likeness and my obituary. And then in 1908, I would pass, and then in 1913, my dear Sarah would follow with me. Now, that might be most of the story, but there might be one lingering question in your mind, and I'm going to let my great-great-grandson answer that. But in the meantime, I wish you all good fortune, and I bid you a kind and fond farewell. I am Joseph Brown's great-great-grandson. Who's young, that's Edith, right here, was my great-grandmother. My grandmother, here in the front row, that's Beatrice. My mother's name was Norma, and I'm the third youngest son she had. I was blessed to be able to know Edith Brown Gleason. She was 10 and I was 10 and she was 92. And my mother would go to visit her very often at the Shorehaven Nursing Home in Grand Haven. She would talk about all kinds of things growing up in the 1880s and 90s in Newpowa, in the urban. Both her and her husband worked at it. But what really caught my attention was when she started talking about the Civil War and her father, and her father's testimony to her about what happened on that battlefield those 3 days. That's the lingering question that sometimes comes up, is how did he survive that horrible experience? Well, he was there, obviously, amongst the dead, but there was also the dying, and there was another soldier there, and that soldier was gravely wounded. He could not walk and go for help, but he was able to move, whereas Joseph could not. And as the time goes by, the needs of the body come into play. The water becomes a problem. That other soldier was able to crawl to a nearby stream and get water. And in a selfless and act of mercy, he returned to give that water to Joseph. And Joseph attributed that life-giving water to him being found alive on the third day. The other soldier was not. He succumbed to his wounds before that time. We don't know the identity of that soldier, but we do know that he was a Confederate. The life-giving water to Joseph was delivered by his adversary. And it's kind of a variation of Good Samaritan, along with God works in a very mysterious way. In the Observer, they noted that the pastor referenced the 23rd Psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. And Joseph certainly was in the valley of the shadow, and he was delivered from it. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me for all the days of my life. Joseph did well in making good on his second life. He did more than what most people do in their first life. He had tragedy, yes, he lost his children, he lost the mill, but he had many blessings in a large family. And in June of 1908, he passed away and he was buried here, and this stone was put up, and then a maple tree stood. Any questions?
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very good. I always wondered whose stone that was.
Yeah, and that's something that not only people have asked me, but you see it online sometimes.
I know we drove by here last week and I said, that poor stone.
I can't answer that.
Yeah.
That happened long before I was born.
Yeah, because that was a humongous tree that was here.
Well, it was,
When was that picture taken? Before they cut the tree down?
Yeah, I would have taken that.
You can see how
There's evidence of it live.
No, there was just the very tiny corner. If you go to find a grave, whenever that picture was taken, there was top of it.
Yeah. So he's buried. That's the family bought that, and the military provided this, right?
Yep, that's his.
That's a
good question.
Yeah, but he's in there. That tree was very little.
Yes, they put the stone there by the road, and they put his stone back here for Sarah's.
Lots of veterans now they could like.
And that's his son and daughter.
Oh yeah, Jim talked to me.
I mean, I've seen online,
Yeah, I stopped in there this morning.
Speculation that this is Joseph's son. Anyway,
Charles Porter Lilly was born December 28, 1856. He was born to Timothy Baxter Lilly and his third wife, Christina Himmelberger. And they had a farm, a large farm out by Titusville, which is on the corner of Bright Township. And they were some of the first people coming to the area. Timothy had a brother there as well. You might remember the Lilly School there. There was a Lilly School. Now, I don't know if
Timothy donated the land or if it was his brother, but I'll tell you, Timothy did his fair share of filling that school. He had 20 plus kids. 3 wives, 20 plus kids. My father-in-law. After attending school in Coopersville, Charles did a little bit of farm work, but then he went in and he worked for Judd Rice, a very common name then. He owned a general store. And Charles really took a liking to that work. He liked working with the customers, and that was right up his alley. So in 1877, he partnered with George Waltrus and opened that store there. They called it the corner store for a reason. It sat on the corner, right? Main and Church. There, that was their store. But by 1884, my husband says, I can do this. I'm going to take over ownership of the whole thing. So he became Charles P. Lilly Store, the corner store. We got married in 1882, and we had 3 kids, Alice, Lee, and Calla Lilly. That was our daughter. And we were doing really well with the store, so we bought that big Victorian house on Main Street in 1902. You know the one with the L? Yeah, that was our house, and we had my 2 children from my first marriage and all the rest of us. And we really did fill that house up pretty good. But it brings me back memories of Eastmanville. I don't know if you guys remember Eastmanville, but it was a tourist town. And in the summer, it was jumping. Everybody had parties, and well, we loved them. And so we'd dress up in our fancies, and we would get in the car, and we'd drive to Eastmanville for those parties, and we would dance into the night. Those roaring 20s, those were good days. Fond memories of those things. So 1900, Charles said, I need more space. Well, he literally doubled the size of that store. And I've got some pictures later, and I want you to take a look at it. You can see it split right down the center. But he opened that. But remember, Coopersville was booming, right? He had groceries and he had dry goods. He was busy doing all kinds of stuff, and he just thrived on it. He wanted to have the best store in West Michigan. He wanted to be known for that. So he said, I got to travel. I got to travel to New York, and I got to go to Chicago and get the fancy clothes that people are asking for. You know, we had the train there. We had the Interurban there. There was a lot going on in Coopersville. He wanted it to be known as the best store in this side of the state, and it was. It was. So when Alice and Lee were old enough in 1912 and 1914, we changed the name to reflect their belonging with our partnership, Charles P. Lilly and Sons. Now, my husband served as president. He was involved in everything. He served as president of the village so many times, and he was in the men's business group. He knew everybody in town, and he was an Odd Fellow. He was in the Masons. And I said, Charles, you've just got to slow down. I mean, you're getting in your 70s now, and it's time to just take a little bit of a break. Well, what does he do? He becomes president of the state bank in town. Well, that's not slowing down. From 170, he's so full of vim and vigor. He's got more enthusiasm and energy than any man in this town. And they were right. But he was only 73. He was such a good man, and I do really miss him. That's right. Charles did not get to see what happened. Charles, on April 29, 1929, took his customary nap in his chair in his store at noon, and they found him there deceased, presumably of a heart attack. So Mary, she continued to live in the big house on Main Street for another 7 years till she passed away in 1936. She had her sons near her daughter still in town, grandchildren just right next door. So in 1937, when she had passed away. But what happened to the Lily's department store, you say? So Alice had taken on the dry goods. Lee took on the grocery section, and they run the business together for many years. By 1945, they knew they needed to expand if they were going to survive. So Lee says, I'm going to buy the big, what was the E.N. Parker Hardware, the 3-story building right directly on the south side of the road from Lily's. So he did, and he remodeled, and he moved all the groceries over there, which freed up Alice as well to move his product into the existing store, and it just became dry goods. So Ellis stayed there for another 7 years, and he decided, I'm going to make my food store a modern grocery store. So to the east of the Veterans Park in Randall, he built a modern day grocery store. It was known as Lily's Food Town when it opened. And it opened in 1956. It had 3 checkout lanes. It had a meat cooler, and it had a huge parking lot. Things they'd never had before. By 1964, and Tom Lilly managed the store. Tom was his son. By 1964, they sold the store to John Cashmere and eventually Bob Cashmere. So Ellis is still on Main Street, right? So Ellis stayed on Main Street with the clothing, and by 1947, he's like, I'm ready to retire. So he got a hold of his son-in-law, Bill McDaniel. He said, bring Jerry Jean, my daughter, down. You guys run the store. I want to retire. So they took over the store in 1947, and they ran the store until it's closed in 1984, after having served the Coopersville community for almost 100 years. Share these photos. As you look at the buildings on the side here, you can see where the big addition was put on in 1900. No, it was not on there for Lily.
Wow, it's smoke.
Yeah.
I used to go in there with you had to play use your slot car track.
Oh,
yeah.
To be loud.
Oh, you recognize that?
Now you see.
I know.
Oh, that's good design. Excellent.
Thank you. Somebody said you had to get the skirts too?
Our uniforms for St. Mike's were there too.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Gym uniforms.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Our green
Your
monkey
varsity
suit
sweater.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
handled all. Are there
get
any
my
other
birthday dress
questions?
there.
Cindy, Bill McDaniel Jr. and his wife built a house in Bluffton, North Carolina. A beautiful house. I saw the plans and the pictures. But they needed something on the front. And what they did, they took that big round register out of the store, and it's now the decoration pad of their house in Bluffton.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I did not know that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I hope to. I've communicated with him a couple times. William Porter, he's named after Charles B. And I was hoping to be able to link him up to the website where we're featuring what would have been his great-grandmother.
Very good, Cindy. You did
Very
awesome.
good,
job.
yeah.
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 Lots of good information.
And his third wife's family, I think, is right back there, too. Himmelbergers.
Oh, yeah.
There'll be some little boxes here and here for you to look at some other videos on my channel. I will also link the Coopersville Historical Society to this video at the end in the description. So if you want to get any more information on Coopersville, there will be a link down below for that. And as always, safe travels and thank you for watching.